Hello.
Hello.
Elon, how are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm very, very good. Allow me to just introduce myself right now. My name is Nadiem Makarim. I am currently the Minister of Education, Culture, Research, and Technology. But before this, I was a technology entrepreneur. I founded one of the largest on-demand services in Indonesia, payment, ride-hailing, food, a few of the other services. And I have the privilege and honor of being able to ask you a few questions, if that's okay. Is that all right?
Absolutely. You're most welcome.
Thank you. I think the first question, and we have a lot of youth here, a lot of young people. I think one of the things that confuses a lot of us is, how are you able to do so much? It's a very simple question, but I think we would love to hear, what are your tools for productivity or principles? We just can't believe the amount that you do. Can you tell us a little bit about how you do the amount that you do?
Well, I do put in a lot of hours. I'm not sure I would necessarily recommend what I do to others, in the sense that I pretty much work all the time. So, it's quite rare for me to take even a Sunday off. So I'm not sure that's necessarily, what I'm not recommending that to many people. With regard to tools for understanding the world, I think the physics framework is extremely helpful. It's, in physics they call it thinking from a first principle standpoint, where you try to understand the most fundamental truths in a particular situation, and then you reason up from there, and then you test your conclusions against the what you believe to be the fundamental truths. So in physics, it would be like testing to see if you're violating conservation of energy or conservation of momentum or something like that, and then constantly, trying to be less wrong. So you should always assume that you're to some degree wrong, and you want to be less wrong. This is, I think, very important. It's a little tougher on the ego, but it's great for getting to the truth of things. Is aspire to be less wrong.
That's amazing. The iterative process, constantly having that healthy dose of skepticism, and of course the sheer amount of hours that you put in. Elon, when I started implementing, I came from the private sector, so imagine the challenges I had to face when I was entering the government. And one of the things that I've noticed is that when you are trying to change things, the amount of resistance to change is extremely high and extremely painful. And you have an entire group of people who are, I would categorize them as naysayers, who are constantly trying to say that what you're trying to achieve is impossible. So my question to you, Elon, is, how do you deal with the naysayers? How do you deal with the people who say, no, you are shooting too far ahead. You are trying to do something that's impossible. Don't bother doing it, or are resistant to change. How do you manage that resistance, the naysayers out there, and continue on?
Well, I would go back to physics in that the only things that are truly impossible are breaking the laws of physics. So as long as you're not breaking laws of physics, it's possible. And it doesn't matter what anyone's opinion is. Physics is the law and everything else is a recommendation. I've seen plenty of people break the law, but I've never seen anyone break physics.
Please give a round of applause. Anything within the laws of physics is possible.
Yeah. And you can certainly challenge the laws of physics, but they've been challenged quite well and have found to be resilient.
Oh, that's incredibly simple and powerful response there. Given that we have a lot of university students here, we wanted to go a little bit into your younger days, Elon. I'm very curious to know, are there several milestone events that happened either in your childhood or in your early youth that you think had the most profound impact to who you are today? If so, can you share a little bit about those moments?
Well, I read a lot of sci-fi and fantasy books. I mean, it's not going to surprise anyone that I, sort of like Star Trek, Star Wars, and that kind of thing. In fact, Star Wars was the first movie I ever saw in a movie theater. So you can imagine if you see an incredible movie like that, and it's the first time you've ever even been in a movie theater. I think I was 6 years old. It's going to have a really big effect on you. Um, so, yeah, so reading and watching a lot of sci-fi and fantasy, Lord of the Rings is probably my favorite book. Um, but I'd say Isaac Asimov had a huge effect on me. The Foundation series, Robert Heinlein, The Moon is a Harsh Mistress, and then in trying to find the truth of things, I explored many avenues and ultimately found that physics was the best way to explore the truth of things. So, at the risk of being a broken record on the physics front, I strongly recommend studying it. Yeah.
Amazing. And if we can just look into, you have made a lot of innovations within your organizations. You've also been quite explicit about certain ways that education should actually change. One of the things
Sure.
we did in Indonesia recently is we've almost completely unbundled higher education, Elon. We have made every single company, nonprofit, all the external institutions outside of university into an accredited university for 1 semester. So now higher education is really a collaborative effort of all institutions, including technology companies. I wanted to know your thoughts about education. And in your ideal world, what would education look like? Either lower education or higher education. If you have some thoughts on that, please enlighten us on what your ideal education in today's world would look like.
Sure. Well, I think when you're trying to learn something, it is extremely important to establish relevance, to say, why are you trying to learn this? Because our minds are constantly trying to forget things. So our minds are at a subconscious level trying to decide what is relevant and what is not relevant. And so most of the things that you see in here, your mind does not want to remember, because there's no point in remembering it. So you have to establish relevance. This is why you want to say, like, why, this is why you should learn this subject or that subject. And once you establish relevance, your mind will naturally want to remember it. So there's I think 2 fundamentally different ways to approach education. One is by teaching to the tools, and the other is by teaching where you want to solve a problem and trying to understand what tools do you need to solve the problem. So, for example, it would be quite boring to have a series of lectures about wrenches and screwdrivers and winches and whatnot, but without establishing relevance. But if you say, well, let's take apart an engine. Now, how do we take this engine apart and put it back together? Well, we're going to need screwdrivers. We're going to need wrenches. We're going to need a winch. We'll need maybe some Allen keys, and you'll have to take it apart and then put it back together. And then you'll understand in the process of doing that why those tools are relevant, and you will remember them. This is a very simple but important principle, which is explain the tools in the process of solving a problem. And then the tools will make sense. Otherwise, they will seem irrelevant, and people will not remember them, and motivation will be difficult.
And do you think to make those tools within a contextual situation, therefore increasing relevance, is that happening right now in educational systems around the world? What do you think needs to change from maybe a teacher perspective or a curriculum perspective?
Yeah, like I said, I think there is generally or there's often things are backwards, where they'll teach the tools instead of teach you how to solve a problem, and then establish the relevance of the tools. So, you might take a course on calculus, for example, but you don't know why you're taking a course in calculus. It just seems like a mental obstacle course that doesn't have any point. And actually, for a lot of people, I'd say it probably is a mental obstacle course that has no point, because unless you expect to use it in the future, there's no point in learning calculus, at least at a detailed level. I think the principles of calculus are interesting to learn, but not the sort of nuanced solving of equations. So I generally say, like, what is it that somebody wants to do, and then then try to solve that problem. And as you solve the problem, say, well, you need this tool, you need that tool, you need this, I think, frankly, a lot of education that happens is kind of pointless, in that people are taught a bunch of things, but they don't actually ever use those things in the future. So, like, why go to the trouble of teaching people things that they will not use in the future? I think that, so quite frankly, I think a lot of education is pointless, unless one simply wants to go through a mental obstacle course and test people's ability to go through a mental obstacle course. I think it's debatable as to whether there should be, we should force people to go through these mental obstacle courses. But if I can make a strong recommendation for what should be taught early in education, is critical thinking. Critical thinking is incredibly important because it creates a mental firewall to allow children to reject concepts that are not cogent, meaning that where it's sort of like having an anti-mind virus defense system. Critical thinking, if taught at a young age, creates a mental firewall that prevents false concepts from establishing themselves in people's minds. So I would strongly recommend the principles of critical thinking be taught at a young age.
Completely agree with you. We have just removed subject-based testing or content-based testing from our national assessment system and replaced it purely on logic, problem solving, and critical thinking, computational logic as foundational skills. So I'm very, very happy to hear you say that, because that's really the core of, it's not what you know, it's actually, do you know what to do with information that you are given or content that you understand?
Yeah.
Yes,
and how do you defend yourself against mental trickery? Exactly. Like people will often, just try various fallacies and sort of trap you with fallacies. And so having defense against fallacies would be, a great course.
Absolutely. And in the digital age, that ability to discern and that healthy dose of skepticism to the information that you receive is almost survival, I think, for the next generation. And I completely agree with you on that. Elon, let's talk a little bit about the future of these young people over here. Can you tell us, what do you think are going to be, if they were to ask you about career advice, what sectors do you think are going to be most exciting, most in demand, and what sectors may not be in the future, will diminish in value? If you could share a little bit about what you think on this matter.
Sure. Well, I think some of it's going to sound pretty obvious, but anything to do with sustainable energy is going to be very significant in the future. So if it's to do with lithium-ion batteries for stationary storage or for cars, aircraft, boats, that's going to be very significant. Artificial intelligence will obviously be very significant in all fields. Self-driving cars, self-flying airplanes, piloting boats, so I'd probably recommend learning those. I mean, these are very technical subjects, of course. There are many other worthy pursuits, but as a technologist, that's what I would recommend: AI and sustainable technology. I think there's a lot of opportunity in synthetic biology with the synthetic messenger RNA stuff. That's going to be a revolution in medicine. I think comparable to audio going from analog to digital. Synthetic RNA is like medicine is going digital. It's a much more profound revolution than I think most people realize. Yeah. I mean, but I'm a technologist, so there's plenty of good things to do that don't involve technology. But from a technology standpoint, I would say sustainable energy, AI, synthetic biology are probably the three big areas.
What technologies scare you the most in terms of its risk? Or are there any technologies that scare you? I don't know.
Well, I think we should be a little concerned about AI because we don't want digital superintelligence that goes wrong and causes damage to humanity. So I think we do need to be cautious with artificial intelligence. On the synthetic biology front, that has the potential to be dangerous because it is possible to create a far more damaging virus than would occur in nature. So, these technology tools are definitely double-edged swords. The more powerful the technology, the more careful we need to be in how we use it.
Absolutely. One last question from myself, and then I'm going to open it up to the audience, Elon. What do you think Indonesia needs to do to become a global economic power by 2045?
Well, I think I would definitely say, widespread education obviously makes sense. I think having high-speed internet connectivity throughout Indonesia is going to be extremely important. I mean, if you think about the internet, if you've got even a low-cost device and low-cost access to the internet, you can learn anything. Yeah. MIT, for example, has, I believe the lectures are available for free on YouTube. So you can learn practically anything you want for free on the internet, provided you have internet access and at least some level of education to allow you to learn more from the internet. So I think widespread internet access is essential for that, because it just allows people to learn whatever they want to learn at whatever pace they're comfortable learning.
Thank you very much. I'd like to open it up now to the audience. If the organizer can please hand over to the first question for Elon. Can you raise your hand? I cannot see where the microphone is being. The moderator will choose the questioner. I will not be choosing. Apparently, the organizer will be doing that. So, no? Is anybody going? Aha, yes, we have the first student to ask a question. Please, introduce yourself and please ask the question to Mr. Musk.
Hello, my name is Praisela Simons, and I'm from Universitas Negeri Malang. I have a question for Mr. Elon Musk. So as a global innovator and world's #1 businessman, of course we have heard about your success stories, and it greatly inspired us. But what about your failures or your mistakes? I want to ask, what were your biggest obstacles or mistakes that you have faced, and how did you overcome it And maybe you can also give us, the students here, a piece of advice, and that will be very amazing. Thank you.
Well, to be frank, I've made so many mistakes that it would take far too long for me to list them all. So I would not want to bore people with the extremely long list of mistakes that I've made in the past. I think that the higher principle here is that it is always to aspire to be less wrong over time. So to acknowledge that you will always be to some degree wrong, but that you wish to be less wrong over time, and if you can be a little less wrong every day, I think you're doing great. It's hard to be less wrong every day, but frankly, even if you could be less wrong most days, that's a pretty big victory. You know, a number of things I've said before publicly, so you know, I think it's important to place weight upon both the heart and the mind, not simply the mind. Some of the biggest mistakes that I've made in terms of hiring people have been when they were strong of mind but not of heart. And both matter a great deal. Yeah, so I think really the higher principle is just assume you're wrong and you want to be less wrong, and just try to be less wrong every day. Seek critical feedback, especially from friends. Often your friends will know what you're saying is wrong, but they don't want to hurt your feelings, so they won't tell you. But if you ask them to tell you and say that it won't hurt your feelings, then they will tell you. So I think getting critical feedback from friends is very helpful. Yeah, hopefully that is useful.
Thank you, Elon. So you can never be always right 100% of the time. We get it wrong all the time. You just have to make sure you're less wrong every day.
Yeah, what I'm saying is that we're always wrong. You should always just assume that you're wrong. In fact, you could, because we are. You want to take the aspire to be less wrong approach versus you're right and let's prove that you're right. Rather take the position of you're wrong and wish to be aspirationally slightly less wrong.
That's incredible. And find friends that are willing to disagree with you. The next question.
Hi. Hi, Elon. I'm a big fan of yours. My name is Sarah Dewanto, and I'm the founder of Duit HP. We're a fintech company that does last mile payments to the unbanked, to the hundreds of millions of unbanked Indonesians. As you said, being a founder is extremely difficult. It's like eating glass while staring into the abyss. I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah, right.
Yes. And so we've actually now been able to do that on a smaller scale, but we need to be able to grow at scale. And that is where our pain point at the moment. How do we scale? We've proven it at a smaller scale. We've distributed last mile payments to about like 50 million unbanked Indonesians in the most remote places. But how do we bring that to something that is greater to millions of people, not just in Indonesia, but in the world? It's not easy. So would appreciate any input you could give. Thank you.
Well, I guess I would go back to widespread internet is going to make a big difference. Minimizing the cost per useful, byte of information is very important. And like over time, like there will be. I mean, there's so many devices being made of PCs and iPhones and Android devices. I mean, there will soon be far more devices made than there are humans that exist in the world. So, at least if the device is like secondhand. It's going to be extremely cheap. And I think we are seeing something of a plateau in device capability, where it's increasingly difficult to add incremental useful functionality to a phone or a laptop at this point. So, which means that they will just become lower and lower cost and more affordable. But really, the key is being online and having an affordable device. But I think the trends are very much in that direction. So that's a lot of reason to be optimistic about the future.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And the last questioner? Yes.
Hi, my name is Safira. I'm from Vidya Mandala Surabaya Catholic University. My question for Elon Musk is, I'm wondering what is your day-to-day habit that turned you into a person that you are now? Thank you.
Well, in terms of a day-to-day habit, I think being curious about the world, how the world works, and curious about technology, and curious about everything, really. I think curiosity is a very important thing to have. And then to be somewhat obsessive about the curiosity. I saw probably obsessive curiosity is probably the number one thing. And I think having a sort of a sense of adventure is also good. I think sometimes people are afraid of things when they shouldn't be afraid of things. You want to make sure that your fear is proportionate to the actual danger. And I think sometimes our instinctive fear is not proportionate to the actual danger. So you want to try to rethink things, just try to say, okay, is that fear justified? Will something bad actually happen? And if, you sort of have to sometimes look at your instinctive fear and question it and decide whether that is, really a valid fear or not. And often it is not. And simply looking at the fear will make it go away.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, Elon, for that response. We've run out of time, but I just wanted to highlight a few things that I think I loved your comment, Elon, about obsessive curiosity. I believe that if we create young people who are compulsively and excessively curious, we will be able to 10x the amount of innovation that entire countries and the world in general will be able to achieve. And I think on your point about fear, I think that is one of the most salient points that we can learn from entrepreneurs like Elon here, is that all greatness, all change, all progress requires risk. And without risk, there is no progress. And I think that if the youth of Indonesia can actually start to realize and accept the fact that risk will be a constant if you want to grow, if you want to achieve, and to make that as part of your journey, and to understand that managing that fear, of which 99% of the things you're scared of generally doesn't really happen. 1% does happen, but 99% of the fears you have do not happen, is something that you will need to control and manage in order to progress. I cannot thank you enough, Elon, for providing us the time today. Thank you for inspiring us. Thank you for refusing to believe in the barriers of what is impossible. It is an honor to have been able to have this discussion with you. Thank you very much. Please, another round of applause for Elon.